Right, can everyone see okay? Hopefully, yes, I cannot see the chat. But yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, it's great to be here with kind of wearing two hats. So thank you to all my co-organizers for this and for also accepting my paper. Yeah, my talk today is called What Do You Know About Nero and Sporus, the Classics and Disturbing Attachments in HBO Succession. I will have some brief introductions of the show. So don't worry if you haven't seen it. Just as some content warnings, I have some references to slavery and medical procedures and also a discussion of classism throughout. So if that's something that might upset you, I want to come back in 15, 20 minutes. They are kind of dispersed throughout the talk, but I will give a heads up when I discuss them in more detail. So I'm first going to give a general introduction regarding Succession and its use of classical references, and then provide some commentary on references to Nero and Sporus specifically, and analyze how they've been received by fans of the show, and what do those references tell us about the show as well. I have a handout. I put the main quotes that I'm gonna use. They might be more extensive in the handout, and I might read less of them in the talk, but hopefully it still helps as a kind of brought them up. So Succession is an American Black comedy drama television series which was created by Jesse Armstrong and started airing on HBO in 2018. So it centers on the Roy family, inspired by the Murdoch family, who are dysfunctional owners of Wizard Royco, a global media and entertainment conglomerate, and are fighting for control of the company amid uncertainty about the health of the family patriarch, Logan Roy. And kind of following, I will be focusing on the two main characters today, were Greg and Tom, and they're also kind of interesting because they're not really part of the main Roy family. So there is an element of difference there already. And kind of following the story of this multi-billionaire family, Succession kind of brings its viewers into a world of absurd wealth, political intrigue, and capital exploitation, where everything, language included, is valuable, marketable, and profitable. The cultural and linguistic capital of Succession is varied and multi-layered. Classical references only constitute a part of it, yet the material weight is very evident. Most of these references are explicit, yet many more work under the skin of the drama, constituting a network of the classics that is not just surface level and for show, but rather creates kind of deep tissue connections, which characters might or might not be aware of. In this talk, I'm not interested in the major explicitness of classic in Succession, but rather what happens when those references kind of remain partly or fully concealed and from who. So by focusing on the classical and not so classical language that remains misunderstood, hidden, or carefully misplaced, I want to ask a series of questions about knowledge, labor, and epistemic power. So how might the script repeat structures of elitism, and in this way highlight the classics as a language of the right, the rich, and the privileged, while also sort of inviting audience members to make the labor of understandings references we might lack. So as I said, there are multiple references to classics in Succession, which also code different relationships. So for example, I have a few screenshots here. The first quote mentioned Tacitus, is actually one of the funniest in the show. I think there is a moment after that I wish I could show, but we don't have time. And already kind of codes. So this guy here, the younger one, Greg, is one of the ones that I'm going to be talking about, and kind of already codes him as not knowing kind of the classical references that everyone else is sort of born into. This is cousin Greg, who is not, it's kind of a cousin who was previously estranged from the family. So he kind of has to painstakingly learn all the codified set of references that is wealthier side of the family uses. So this is something that goes on throughout the show, of family members that are not core members of the Roy family as kind of coded as kind of having to learn these references. For example, these other two screenshots that I have on the other side, they're from an episode where the Roy family were kind of new rich money, goes visit and tries to make a deal with the Pierce family, where instead old money. And there is a very interesting speech that the patriarch gives where he compares their family to Romans amongst Greece. So already kind of making a difference between them as the new money Romans and then the old money family as the Greeks. But also coding Tom, who is this other guy here, as the barbarian, as opposed to the Roman side, and Tom has married into the family. So there is already a level of estrangements there. So because classics is already integrated into this kind of language of capitalism and class, there is already an element of not only class difference, but also epistemic difference. So here I want to quote from Miranda Fricker on epistemic injustice and hermeneutical injustice specifically. She says that hermeneutical injustice is not sort of perpetrated by individuals, but will normally make itself apparent in discursive exchanges between individuals. Consequently, a group's unequal hermeneutical participation will tend to show up in a localized manner in hermeneutical hotspots, locations in social life where the powerful have no interest in achieving a proper interpretation. So this is quite evident in Tom and Greg relationship. As I said, yeah, cousin Greg is like a partial stand-in for some viewers in a first cousin once removed who joins the Roy family but lacks the cultural references, business skills, or language they possess. Whereas Tom is, okay, I have a family tree here. So Tom is Shiv's husband, who's sort of infatuated with the Roy family's power and prestige. He sort of pursues acceptance from the family, sometimes humiliating himself in the process. And he asserts what little influence he has over Greg, who is, again, like this obliging cousin coming in very late. So he kind of like seduces Greg into the world of succession by kind of like sharing and withholding his epistemic power, sharing the knowledge he also once lacked, while still very clearly maintaining a hierarchy between them so that they can have at least someone in the family that he can basically walk on. So there is a very interesting scene, again, I don't have the time to show, but it talks about how it literally says at some point, I'll show you how to be rich, and kind of like tries to teach him how to eat like a rich person. The scenes that I want to focus on clearly focus on, like, to reference the Nero and Sporus reference that I want to discuss. I'm just going to see if it works now or if I have to stop screening. Oh, yeah, great.
But thank you. This probably won't work.
Greg, what do you know about Nero and Sporus?
Nero and
Sporus. Greg, yeah. Sporus was a young slave boy. He was Nero's favorite. And you know what Nero did to him?
Nero and Sporus. This is not IP I'm familiar with.
Well, Nero pushed his wife down the stairs. And then he had Sporus castrated, and he married him instead. And he gave him a ring, and he made him dress up like his dead wife.
Wow. Plot twist. Didn't see that coming.
Yeah, I bought a book on the Romans to read in prison. It's a big book.
What, is it a good book?
It's a decent book, yeah. I'd castrate you and marry you in a heartbeat.
Right, so hopefully everyone could hear. Shout if not. But yeah, so the context of this scene is quite interesting. I also like that it starts with a question. It's like, what do you know about Nero and Sporus? Kind of already assuming that Greg is not gonna know the answer. A queer Latinist might spot the reference, of course. Online, the scene like went viral and was particularly appreciated by the fans of this ship, like the relationship between these two characters, who is often kind of understood online as homoerotic, and was taken as sort of a confirmation of the relationship. So this classical exemplar is kind of was used to signify a queer romantic and erotic moment between the two. The context of the scene, so this happens in the middle of the last season of Succession that I heard, and basically Tom is getting increasingly frustrated with his wife. Is maybe about to go to prison. It doesn't go, obviously, but is maybe about to go to prison because of a scandal that is issued in the company, and so it's kind of like finding his only like source of comfort from Greg, who he is the only one on his side at this point. So as I said, like many took it as, yeah, a kind of like queer moment, yet the scene was also used to foreshadow a turn of event at the end of the season, where the reference comes up again. I'm just going to show it now as well.
Hey, Tommy. What's up?
So, things may be in motion.
As in, is anyone going to jail?
No. No. So, do you want to come with me, Sporus?
can I ask for a little more information?
Right, I'm just gonna stop here, but this was the season finale, and kind of like the Sporus reference is taken again to confirm a working relationship between the two. This is a moment where Tom kind of like betrays his wife completely, and instead sides with Greg and the family patriarch, Logan, to keep the company away from the children and his wife. So it kind of, yeah, confirms this siding of the two. And for the sake of a queer moment of like kind of misrepresentations, that like this was taken again as a confirmation of the two relationship in a very like, again, romantic and erotic sense, more than that having to do with labor. So this is interesting because like because of this sake of misrepresentation, many members of different online communities kind of overlooked several dynamics of the reference, namely that Sporus, also known as Sabina, and Nero's wife, who was was trans and formerly enslaved, which were instead sort of made explicit in the show, I would say, or at least more than the audience reaction shows. Just to like signal some sides of the audience reaction. So for example, so this is a main tweet from the Succession official account on Twitter. It has 10K likes. The average tweet like goes around 3-4K likes. Fanfiction on our own essentially doubled in numbers after the first Sporus reference and doubled again after the season finale. Most of them have like references to Nero Sporus in the title, in the tags, or in the author's name. And this is like very good fan art that I found on Tumblr. Also, if you Google Nero and Sporus now, Succession is the second suggested result. They come up in the image Google search. The most liked tweet mentioning Nero and Sporus on Twitter is about Succession. And also, like, I found this tweet really funny. So from Twitter user Kurweed, they say, never seen Succession, but my timeline has led me to believe it's about a gay guy named Greg. So characters are also sort of entering the common imaginary as sort of canonically queer. Before going into why this is like sort of problematic, I think, and like deserves more attention, I just want to focus a second on what is the real story of Sporus. This is where I go into a bit more detail maybe about medical procedures. So Suetonius in Life of Nero says he castrated the boy Sporus and actually tried to make a woman of him, and he married him with all the usual ceremonies, including a dowry and a bridal veil, took him to his house attended by a great throng, and treated him as his wife. Sporus or Sabina can also be referenced as Sabina, which was her name after this transition. And here I want to quote from Sherry Morgan, who we're going to have the pleasure to listen to tomorrow, I believe. In her articles on Roman historians and reliable narrators, she says, Sporus appears to have taken to femininity like a duck to water. Nero named her Sabina, and I shall continue to use female pronouns for her because her actions and her treatment by other Romans demand them. Sabina went all in on being a woman, and for 2 years did very well in difficult circumstances. As she'd been assigned female at birth, she might now be famed as a shrewd political operator. So I think this is all somewhat in line with the show or use of the reference. There is a clear imbalance between Tom and Greg, yet Greg uses sort of his position to make the best of the situation and always sides with the winning side. But it also erases Sporus or Sabina trans identity. Yet the internet decided it was a peak moment of queer recognition. And why is that, I think, an issue? So what does this Sporus moment really show us? I argue that despite the relationship between Sporus and Nero certainly being a part of queer history, the online reception of this moment displays that there are still unsavory aspects to queer sexualities in the classical world that we need to carefully consider, study, and critique instead of seeing them as a moment of queer recognition. The reaction some Succession fans had in reading the classical references as a story of love and eroticism kind of seems to miss the mark to me. The example is not a confirmation of the queerness in Tom's and Greg's relationship, but rather a confirmation of the class division of who is doing the labor for who. This is a fault that I think queer theory and generally queer studies and reception often fall into. Here quoting from Kajamin in Genealogies of Queer Theory, it says, queer theory's interdisciplinary stance has sometimes made it difficult to address the fact that the field has developed its own normativities and produced its own marginalization. I would argue that one of this normativity is certainly that, like, kind of the classical word, sort of like sometimes seen as this sort of ideal queer word, yet when it really is not. And on top of that, when received by a show like Succession that talks about multi-billionaires and capitalism, we kind of like, you know, fall into the trap of idealizing like this capitalist word too. I mean, it also talks about the dangers of idealism. Says that it kind of inverts the historical denigration of queer bonds. and has been a very powerful redemptive impulse, yet it tends to be ahistorical. Instead, pushes for the idealization and says the experience of unease can serve as a generative heuristic for politicized scholarship. The idealization de-exceptionalizes queerness in order to analyze queer possibility as inextricable from relations of power, queer deviance as intertwined with normativity, and queer alternatives and not necessarily just alternatives. I think this is all very interesting, and I completely agree with this push for de-idealization, especially in this instance where, for example, like queer possibility is certainly linked with relations of power. And yet, this is a critique of the reception of the quote and not about how the show uses it. So let me go back to my title for a second. What do you know about Nero and Sporus? In his Substack, Brian Taylor argues that more and more, I feel like Succession real genrering is neither comedy or drama. A show that has nothing revelatory or interesting to say about the way we live and feel, whose sole function is mere mimesis. It is in this way a perfect emanation of late capitalism. We're just watching, and sometimes we feel as we watch, but mostly we're just watching. But does it tell us something that we don't already know? Does it reveal anything? Does it force us to see anew something we missed? Does it refine or deepen our feeling for what it is to be alive? Or is it just, I don't know, shadows dancing on the wall? So to me, like, this raises really interesting questions in terms of how Succession uses classical references. Who is doing the labor of uncovering the classical references in Succession, how and why? I think, as you know, for someone that studied classics, there is a dangerous idealization not only of the use of classical references in the show, but also the general present. We love the recognition, the utopia of the past. However, I do think that it's necessary for us to do a different kind of labor to uncover these disturbing attachments instead of falling for the trap of idealizing queer classicism. And also, you know, the show uses use of the classics. So what do we gain by recognizing our discipline in a show like Succession? I think, you know, there are discussions to be made, but I don't think this immediate recognition should happen. I'm just gonna skip ahead here because I think I'm a bit short on time. But I think if we see the show purpose as sort of repeating and showing you the structures and languages of injustice, of classism, racism, then we're playing its game by kind of misrecognizing the Sporus scene as a moment of queerness. Some references might hinge on this premise of queerness, but instead sort of reinstate class division at every step. So I think the online response shows how dangerous it is for queer people to only see the classical world as a nostalgic place in which to find belonging. I think it reminds us that when looking at queerness in the ancient world, we should not see it as a utopia of sexual freedom, but instead queer relationship in ancient Greek and Rome were also unequal, characterized by labor, enslavement. It is necessary then to do part of this labor to uncover this disturbing attachment instead of falling trapped for the idealizing of queer classicism. I just want to finish with some questions now that, again, have to do with how the show uses classics. I think, is there value in the show just repeating the structure? Are we being asked to do the labor that the show should be doing itself? Or is it just sort of showing and exposing this kind of language enough? I have to say, I was like having a discussion with Nicolette yesterday, and we were talking about like kind of like how shows like kind of over moralize sometimes and give a moral at the end of the show. I do think that there is some value in just showing the structures rather than telling the viewers what to think. But is it enough if the online reception of the show somehow misread the scene still? Is it enough for the show to just repeat this use of classics as capitalist language while also asking viewers to do the labor to uncover these references? These are just some starting points that I would love to discuss more. I'm just going to conclude with this meme that Claire sent me. Thank you, Claire. I'm just obsessed with this. Kind of like really exemplifies pink capitalism and their obsession with these terrible rainbow uniforms. So yeah, I'm just going to show my bibliography a second, which is also on the handout. And yeah, thank you very much for listening.
Fantastic.